Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we're actually going to film the last of my reviews that I'm doing for you while I'm at home over Christmas 2015, and we're actually going to go to one of my local breweries here in Clackmannanshire, Scotland, and these guys are very famous worldwide for the Old Engine Oil Porter, and we've got a special edition of that beer tonight that is infused with Scottish raspberries. So we're going to go to Harviestoun Brewery, which is in Alva, just a few miles down the road from my house, but this one is called Raspy Engine, and it's a little bit lighter than the original Old Engine Oil too. It comes in at 5.3%, but we're very lucky here in Clackmannanshire to have Harviestoun Brewery. These guys are one of the oldest and most established Scottish craft breweries, and in fact one of my personal favourite Scottish craft beers is the Schiehallion beer. It's this really nice grapefruity lager, and that was the one that really launched Harviestoun to be the kind of famous brewery that they are these days. These beers are available all across the world, in Australia, New Zealand, Japan as well, and probably down in South America too. So if you want to try Scottish craft beer, Harviestoun is a very good place to start. I'd personally recommend either Schiehallion or the Old Engine Oil beer, a very, very famous one. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery. If you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual websites are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other Harviestoun reviews. There's maybe about 7 or 8 of those down there, so do check them out if you're particularly interested in Harviestoun beer. And there's all the usual social media things, Facebook, Twitter and Untappd, so please follow me on there. Your support would be much appreciated, and please do let me know some of the other beers that you'd like me to have a look at, and if you do want to see more reviews, please subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of interesting things coming up. But anyway, to tell you about Harviestoun, as I mentioned to you a minute ago, Harviestoun are one of the oldest craft breweries in Scotland, and the brewery was founded back in 1983 by Ken Brooker, who used to homebrew, and he would invite people round to taste his beer, and he would actually give them like little cards to write on and see what they thought of the beer. And these kind of evening tastings at Ken's actually became really famous. They spread through word of mouth all over Clackmannanshire, in fact. But a few years later he decided that he wanted to brew professionally, so he converted an old steading in Dollar into a small brewery back in 1986. This little steading, or the farmhouse if you like, was over 200 years old. But over the following years they gradually added more beers to their repertoire, and this was after Ken decided to invest in the brewery in 1989, and this was when they first installed professional equipment for the first time. The original brewery was made of old dairy equipment, basically stuff that they'd hand welded together, so it was quite an interesting contraption apparently. But in 1994 they introduced their famous Schiehallion beer, and this was the lager that really made a huge name for the brewery, and it really, you know, this was the one that really propelled them to success. But the big break for the brewery came in 1996 when they won the Tesco Beer Challenge, and this resulted in the first bulk order of beer for their brewery, and soon after they launched their flagship beer, Bitter and Twisted, and this was when they launched their exports to the USA as well. And as I say, this brewery have grown quite steadily ever since then. But since the turn of the millennium, the brewery has become even more decorated, and they introduced the famous Old Engine Oil Porter, which is actually a very popular export beer. This one has since been barrel aged to create the Ola Doof series, and in 2003 they moved to their current facility in Alva, which is a few miles down the road from Dollar. Still very close to me, of course. But this brewery was sold to the Caledonian Brewery from Edinburgh in 2006, which was bought in turn by Heineken in 2008. But oddly enough, Heineken didn't actually want the Harviestoun Brewery, so it was bought out by a group of Caledonian brewery directors, so it remains an independent operation. And it's actually quite funny when you drive past the Harviestoun Brewery. Every so often you'll see a new tank being attached to the outside of it. It's a brewery that is very much expanding, but they still remain a very dedicated craft brewery. So if you ever come to Clackmannanshire, do phone them up. They will happily give you a tour around the brewery, and we're actually very lucky here in Clackmannanshire because this county is very well known for being a whisky bond county, I guess you could say. There is a rumour that goes around that the whisky that is stored in Clackmannanshire is worth more than the gold that's in Fort Knox, but we have two very good craft breweries as well. Harviestoun, of course, from Alva, and then there's Williams Brothers over in Edinburgh. But these guys, of course, have been in Clackmannanshire for all their life. But just to list the other beers you can get from these guys, of course, there's one of my personal favourites, the Schiehallion. There's the Bitter and Twisted Old Engine Oil. There's the Engineer's Reserve as well, which is an exclusive export version of this. There's the Ridge. There's Ola Doof. There was also Broken Dial for a while as well. Ola Doof, of course, you can get different editions of. They very recently released an IPA as well, which is supposed to be nice, so I'll need to see if I can get a hold of that one and review that for you. But there's various different cask beers that they release. So if you find yourself in Scotland, particularly in Stirling in fact, these beers are quite widely available through Wetherspoons and some of the local pubs. You can try a lot of the special edition Harviestoun brews, but this is a very good Scottish craft brewery. As I mentioned to you, one of the oldest ones that we have here. I think it might be the second oldest after Brotnails, but they produce some really good stuff. So if you want to get into Scottish craft beer, the basic point is that Harviestoun is a very good place to start. So let's actually get on to the tasting of this beer itself. So this one is a 5.3% porter. It's hopped with Galena, East Kent Goldings and Fugos hops, and it's malted with roast barley and oats, and it also has a special addition of Scottish raspberries to the brew as well. On the back here it says, when we saw our brewmaster heading back from a nearby farm with a punnet of freshly picked wild Scottish raspberries, we knew jam wasn't on her mind. Sure enough, they were the latest underbonnet tinkering with our beloved old engine oil. For maximum flavour, and because life's too short to strain a raspberry, the fruit got thrown in whole, juice, pulp and seeds. The result was like the most grown-up dark chocolate and raspberry pud ever, and it instantly joined our wee beastie experimental collection. We call it Raspy Engine, all the rich, velvety mouthfeel of our iconic Imperial Porter with a sharp, fruity finish, a degree sweetener, a touch lighter, but at 5.3% ABV, still with plenty of welly. So yeah, it should be quite interesting. I'll let you have a little quick look at the artwork of this one before we open it up. We'll just bring the camera up and check that you can see it. You can see there's Harvey the Mouse just driving his little pink car on there. It's a little pink motorbike with a sidecar actually. You can see it there, but very nicely presented. One of these typical Harviestoun things. You can see Harvey on the top of the bottle there, and there he is on the bottle cap too. They actually changed the Harvey artwork maybe about a year ago now, but you can see as well it says craft brewed in Scotland since 1983. As I said, these guys are one of the kind of premier Scottish craft breweries. It also says 1.7 UK units, so it's a very nice little beer. So let's get this guy open and we'll get on with the tasting then. So as you can see, a nice kind of bubbly opening there. If I pop it, you'll get a bit of smoke out of it. But let's get this guy out and into the glass. I actually bought this beer through in Glasgow. I never saw this one in Clackmannanshire. We do need to get a good beer shop through here. I think there's one in Alva itself actually. So I need to go through and visit that at some point, but it's actually quite hard to get these different experimental Harviestoun beers. And do please, if you're watching the video, let me know in the comment section where you're actually finding some of these beers. It would be interesting to see how far their experimental range gets. But as you can see, this beer is poured a really nice dark rosewood colour. If I hold it up to the light, it actually has a bit of a kind of dark ruby tinge to it. There's a quarter finger, maybe a third of a finger of a frothy beige tan head there. But it looks very nice. There's a few big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass. No visible sediment at all. The beer's too dark to get any transparency from, and you can see some little bubbles just going up towards the bottom of the head there. Overall, a very, very attractive looking beer. So let's give this guy a smell and see how we get on. Oh, now that is actually really interesting. Without sugaring it up, you can smell the raspberries coming out of this beer. They must have chucked a hell of a lot in there. Some of these fruit infused beers, you know, the fruit is just a little bit in the background, but in this one you really can smell it. That's really nice actually. With these dark beers especially, you want to just take a little bit of time and actually give a good bit of time just to smell these aromas, especially when it comes to the Old Engine Oil. The Old Engine Oil is a beautiful beer. And when you get little tinkerings of it like this one, the Raspy Engine, just take a little bit of time and smell the aroma here. The raspberry is very, very prominent, especially when you sugar it up. It really does smell just like juiced raspberry actually. The raspberry even dominates some of the kind of typical porter elements that you would expect from this beer. So underneath that raspberry, if you let it settle a bit, you can get a little bit of roasted character, but that's very subtle, I would say. The kind of coffee roasted character. There's a bit of sweet chocolate in there. The chocolate comes across a little bit more sweet, but I'm not really detecting much behind the raspberries. The raspberries are the most prominent aroma coming out of this. You can get a little bit of earthy hop, but that's very, very subtle. You can pick up some of the candied fruit ester in there too, but really it's these sharp and sweet raspberries that are dominating the aroma here. Can't even smell any caramel. I remember the Old Engine Oil having some really nice caramel aromas to it, but you really can't pick that out here. But there's a bit of bready character to it. You can pick up a little bit of the cereal But as I said, the raspberry notes in this are just beautiful, so I'm sure this is going to be another awesome beer from Harviestoun. So without further ado, let's actually get stuck into this one. This is the Raspy Engine, a special edition of the Old Engine Oil Porter infused with Scottish raspberries from Harviestoun Brewery in Alva in Clackmannanshire, very close to me, Slangia. Now that's really quite interesting actually. It's a really nicely blended flavour, this one. It's actually a lot lighter, I would say, than the original Old Engine Oil. The Old Engine Oil kind of just floods the palate here, but this one is a lot more subtle, I would say. But it's, you know, that's nothing against the flavour. The flavour of this is really, really nice. Yeah. Especially with these dark beers, as I always recommend, sugar the whole beer around your palate and just let the full palate adjust to this before you start dissecting the flavour. The raspberries are dominating the flavour in this one, and a lot of the typical Old Engine Oil notes that you would expect from this beer, a lot of the typical porter notes are quite subtle because these raspberries are so prominent in the flavour. So just let your full palate adjust to this before you start dissecting the flavour. But it's very well balanced actually. That's one of the things that Harviestoun really excel at too. It's just getting the right balance in their beers, regardless of whether it's a light beer or a dark beer like this one. They're really top class at that. So the underlying flavour to this one, or the underlying mouthfeel I should say, is a really nice, just juicy fruit character. In the middle of the palate, you just get a bready blanket. It just goes right across the middle of the tongue there. You've got this kind of almost rye breadish character that just blankets the middle of your tongue. There's a little bit of roasted coffee in there, some sweet chocolate, and maybe there's not really much of a kind of caramelly flavour coming out of this one for me. It's more the kind of dark, bready rye character, a little bit of cereal, and some of these roasted coffee and slightly almost black malt flavours coming out of this, but the raspberries really give you a nice balance to it with the big fruity juicy character in there. Around the edges of the tongue at the back there's maybe just a little bit of earthy character, but that takes a long time to come out. These juicy raspberry flavours stay in the mouth for so long actually. It's really... this beer is just a really quirky and very interesting beer. You have to try this if you come across it. It's top drawer stuff once again from Harviestoun Brewery, but I wouldn't expect any less of them. This beer, you know, out of the bottle, it's really good, but I can only imagine how good this beer is going to be on cask. It's actually quite light when it comes out the bottle, and with a cask beer you'll get a lot more, how do you say, I guess, a lot more body from it, more creamy mouthfeel out of it, and it would really benefit from that. There's nothing wrong with the flavour at all, but just as a kind of placebo effect, you want a little bit more body to it, and as a cask beer, this one would be, you know, really, really superb. It's very, very good just now, but I think it needs that little bit of cask ale body to it, and I'm sure you will find it in cask ale at some point, but that's not to say it's not a beautiful beer. It is another superb beer from Harviestoun Brewery, there's no denying that. It's a really quirky and interesting beer, so if you enjoy these ones that will test your palate a little bit and have a really nice complex flavour to them, this is one that you really want to go for. But yeah, as I said, the back corners of the palate, there's a little bit of earthy character in there, but the juicy raspberry flavour just dominates the hop part of the palate. The edge of your tongue, the very edge of your tongue where the hoppy characters would come out normally, is really juicy, and you just feel that juiciness. It lingers there, and you start to get more of a candied fruit flavour as you move into the aftertaste, and the juicy raspberries just start to fade away a little bit. But in the middle of the palate, you've got a little bit of dryness. As I said, those roasted, slightly black malts, that rye bread character in there. And there's a bit of dark chocolate there too, but the raspberries really dominate the flavour. All of these other things that I'm mentioning to you are really quite subtle, but Again, really, really beautiful beer. There's the candied fruit starts to come out a little bit more in the aftertaste too, particularly at the front of the tongue. As I always say, you get that little oily bubble that comes out behind the very front curve, and that's where some of these candied fruit flavours are coming out. But again, this is a superb beer from Harviestoun, and I wouldn't expect any less of that brewery. Once the flavour actually starts to build in your palate too, these more subtle coffee, chocolate and slightly bready flavours with the kind of roasted bread character, that starts to come out a little bit more. You'll feel that as you drink this beer. It progressively just gets a little bit stronger. But in terms of the mouthfeel, this one, I would say this is actually quite light to mid-body. It's a lot lighter in the body than the original Old Engine Oil. It's very, very smooth though. There's a little bit of oily character to it, but it's more juicy, I would say. The raspberries in this beer actually make it really quite juicy. The carbonation is quite soft, and there's maybe just a little bit of a creamy mouthfeel to this, but overall it's really quite sweet and juicy. There's a little bit of dry character from the malt base, but there's not much sweetness actually there either, which is quite interesting. It's more of a juicy sweetness rather than a malty sweetness, but overall this is another top class beer from Harviestoun. Like I said, this beer is very, very good as it is, but it would be really kind of top class, world class I guess you could say, if it had that kind of cask ale mouthfeel to it. So I really would love to see if I could find this in one of these old school pool cask things. Just to have a bit of a creamier mouthfeel would make this beer really just top class. But overall it's another really awesome beer from Harviestoun Brewery. So if you do get the chance to try this one, and it's an experimental beer, I think it might be limited edition as well, do give it a try. This is the Raspy Engine Porter, a special edition of their famous Old Engine Oil, and it really is worth trying. So yeah, as always, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. If you do happen to have tried this before, please let me know your own thoughts on it in the comment section below. Let me know where you're trying this beer from as well. It's always interesting to hear that aspect as well, especially when it's my local brewery. So I thank you once again for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Go and check out my social media down there too. Your support would be much appreciated. Go and check out Harviestoun Brewery, one of my favourite breweries in fact, my local brewery here in Clackmannanshire. Go and check out Williams Brothers as well. That's the other local brewery here, and you should be able to find these beers quite internationally. But thank you once again for watching, and I will catch you soon with my next beer reviews. The next ones, of course, are going to be a German series that I started filming for you a while ago, and I'll finish these videos off as I arrive back in Lund. So I thank you once again, and I hope you've had a nice festive period, but you'll be seeing this review at the end of February. So I'll catch you soon with the next one. Go and check out Harviestoun from Clackmannanshire in Scotland. Slàinte just now.